right, Nostalgia Trappers, welcome to the program. David Parsons here. Hope all is well in your world. Believe it or not, this is episode 300 of Nostalgia Trap. I can't believe we've done 300 episodes. But when you look back at the archive, there they are. And God, we've had a lot of really great guests. I am just very impressed by the writers and historians and media people and online freaks and others that have come on this show and given us really, really cool perspectives and ideas and thoughts to chew on. So I just want to thank every Nostalgia Trap guest that's ever made this show what it is. And I want to thank the people that listen to the show. When I first started this thing, I was just like, I don't know, interviewing a few grad school professors and putting those interviews online. I didn't think many people would really be interested in that. But now, you know, we're crafting a Nostalgia Trap empire. Not really, but, you know, a lot of people listen to the show, and I'm really thankful for that, and it's fun to have this platform. So, onward and upward, we have lots more going on the show. In fact, I did want to announce something exciting because we're doing this with our subscribers, a movie club starting November 19th. There'll be like live Zoom discussions where we get together and think about a particular movie. We're going to do like genre to start off and organize our movie watching through genre. So our first genre is film noir. We'll be watching The Night of the Hunter and thinking about how it fits and doesn't fit into the noir category. So if you want to join us, you can do that at patreon.com/nostalgiatrap. Really appreciate it, and I'm really looking forward to doing those Zoom discussions. It's going to be fun. You know, my best memories, honestly, of college were of watching movies and talking about them with people that cared. And that sounds corny, but it's hard to find such things anymore. And if we can do that on Zoom with Nostalgia Trap people, that'll be really fun. So come check that out. And please enjoy this episode. This is me and Justin Rogers Cooper doing something a little bit different. I asked him to indulge me in talking about one Red Hot Chili Peppers song, a song called Californication, that I noticed, you know, I used it for a class on California and pop culture a few weeks ago, and I realized that this song was like some sort of like fucking prophetic transmission from the gods, and I don't mean Anthony Kiedis. I mean, they tapped into something, in particular, the themes we get into on this show, California as a sort of front face of American imperialism and capitalism, Los Angeles in particular, but the whole culture industry and tech. It really has it all, and I thought Justin was the right person to help us make sense of it all. So I really enjoyed this conversation. I hope you do too. Thanks so much for being a Nostalgia Trap listener, and enjoy this. Here is me and Justin Rogers Cooper talking about Californication. All right, Justin Rogers Cooper, if you can believe it, it is episode 300 that we're about to record. I have no idea how many of those you're on, but you know, it perhaps goes without saying that we couldn't have done it without you. That we've reached the mountaintop of 300 episodes, and I thank you for joining me for all of them, but especially for this one because that's what we're doing right now.
Well, you know, I see myself as the George Costanza to your Jerry Seinfeld, so I'm glad that I've been able to be around for a Dirty Dozen or so. Congratulations. I thought 200 was like literally 2 weeks ago, so I couldn't believe how quickly 200 to 300 went.
We upped the pace during the pandemic because people had the time. There were I was lucky that you know, this show, a lot of it besides you and me rambling our thoughts on history and politics, etc. We also do the bulk of Nostalgia Trap episodes are interviews with academics and writers, journalists, media people. And I've been lucky during pandemic that everyone got used to Zoom, and it was just sort of like, let's hop on the Zoom and talk. Everyone's like cozy in their sweaters at home. So that's actually been really great for the podcast. And yeah, 200, I don't remember when 200 was, but it was, yeah, I think like a year and a half ago, something like that.
Well, I'll save any more compliments for some other forum, but I tip my hat to you and all your guests, and I think 300 is a nice achievement, and congratulations.
Yeah, and into the future we go. I wanted to with this episode, I think it makes sense that we can kind of take stock a little bit. And I had this thought. This is a sort of an out of the ordinary episode a little bit for us, but I think it will be well within Nostalgia Trap territory. as many of you know, as many listeners know, I teach these classes that are like lecture series for a variety of what are called lifelong learning institutes. It's actually a world I've been really grateful to be a part of because it allows me to like take on weird topics and talk about whatever I want in terms of history, etc. But I taught this class just over the last few weeks. This class called "I'd Be Safe and Warm: California in the American Popular Imagination," and I really thought of sharing movies, music, television shows, and other bits of cultural ephemera as a way to get into this idea of what California is. And I would say if there was a thesis to the whole class, it was that California becomes a stand-in for the American dream particularly in pop culture. So I started with that "Mamas and the Papas" song, the California Dreamin'. But quickly like discovered as I was researching for this class and like always trying to bring new songs and new movies and new TV shows to the crowd. I listened carefully to a song I'd never listened carefully to before, and that's a song called "Californication" by the Red Hot Chili Peppers. The sort of, I think, their emblematic song now, honestly. They play it at every one of their live shows. It's like their theme song. It functions as a weird theme song for the whole history of California. And it's a song that, like I said, I never really got, pulled up the Genius lyrics and looked at the lyrics to before. But as I was looking at the lyrics and began to form a little bit of a lecture around it, I realized that, and I was sending them to you because I was freaking out. I realized this song is some sort of crazy cipher of like a lot of the things we talk about, regarding capitalism and California and how those things kind of go together. But I wonder what our history is with the Red Hot Chili Peppers, because they're a band that has a very particular. I mean, they're like a 30-year project at this point. I mean, they've been around basically my entire lives, and they've had like a particular evolution in pop culture, and they definitely play. I think there's a lot of stigma around the Red Hot Chili Peppers fans and the music itself. Like, they're a very divisive band. A lot of people like really, really hate them. Mm-hmm. And I understand that. I understand where they're coming from. I mean, I was raised in Southern California, and it's sort of a cliche of the culture, these guys. But were you a Red Hot Chili Peppers fan? Did you listen to them in the 90s? When did you come to them as being around? I feel like they're kind of unavoidable.
When I was, I think, 11 or so, I was visiting my cousin in Minneapolis, my cousin Stephanie, and she was the one that first, like, she was the first person that had CDs that I knew. I didn't know CDs were even a thing.
They looked like they were from the future when I first saw them.
Yeah.
And now they look like the past. It's really weird.
Yeah. And she was the person who introduced me to Pearl Jam. I remember that 10 album cover. But she was also the person that had Blood Sugar Sex Magic. And she was kind of like a few years older than me and just sort of super cool and with it. And I was 11, so that's when I first started hearing it. And, around the time I was in middle school, especially 8th grade, Under the Bridge was like a very popular song that year, 1994 or so. And it had been a very popular song for a while. And a lot of my kind of few buddies that I had, they all liked that song a lot. And
a song about doing heroin, but also a song about California and a feeling of a city.
Yeah. And I did pick up on the fact that by the time I got to high school and kind of nearing college, I did realize the Red Hot Chili Peppers were not like a cool band to like. Mm-hmm. Although that kind of Blood Sugar Sex Magic t-shirt, if you remember, was everywhere. So people would wear the shirt. And people used to wear Siamese Dream shirts around that same time.
Yeah.
You could get those shirts like at the mall, like at a Waves music store, along with rock posters and shit. So there was a paraphernalia of 90s rock that the Peppers were a part of, but only like the early 90s, late 80s Peppers. And so then the later 90s, early aughts Peppers did not have the same kind of cachet. But I think one of the things that, we can think about for today with the song, but also with the band and also with the whole trajectory of a certain kind of, I don't know how you would want to say it, alt sound of the era and of the last like 30 years is they became uncool really at the moment where Kiedis starts to show a different kind of songwriting craft. And when he starts to experiment in the modes of masculinity, where he transitions away from the kind of rock rap roots of the 80s and the kind of funkiness, which, yes, still shines through the album that Californication comes from. But he really starts to sing and write ballads that are clearly trying to tap the market sentiment that they hit with Under the Bridge. So like Under the Bridge, number one, he had never written a song like that before. I believe it was Rick Rubin or one of those other producers that found it in his notebook. And there was this vulnerability crisis around sharing, the inner male poetry among the band.
Sometimes I feel like I don't have a partner. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're worlds away from Limp Bizkit,
But that made that song made them. I mean, they were around for a while, but they were never at the level that song took them to. Like that. Well, in other words, there's something important about revealing that sentiment.
And I'm pretty sure, I could be wrong. I would love to just see the data on this. I'm pretty sure that song specifically opened them up to a female audience that they hadn't had before. Mm-hmm. And I mean that in the broadest scope of the gendering inherent in that term. And I think it also activated a kind of sexuality for, at least for him, if not for the whole band, especially when you think about that video.
Oh, yeah.
That
this guy never wears a shirt. Never wears a shirt. Yeah.
But it kind of transitions from being, I'm a tough guy not wearing a shirt in that sort of I'm a surfer on this California beach tradition. And I think it starts to activate the sexuality in a way that is both, an opening towards a larger demographic and market, but also not, that kind of masculinity, as we know, can play a lot of different ways. And it's one thing to signal your sort of rock sexuality through your hair. And it's another one to be so upfront about it with your body. And I think the whole band sort of emphasized a kind of physique of sexuality. It's not necessarily common. And I think that also played, it was, let me put it this way. I don't think you can divorce that from the turn towards the ballads. And I think that is wrapped up, that kind of masculinity issue is wrapped up in the rejection of the Chili Peppers by a certain strand of dudes, especially like indie arch snarky guy, there is something about their sort of flaming overwrought chests and six packs that isn't necessarily folding over neatly with the kind of John Cusack playing indie rock loving dude of the era.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up. It's funny because I saw this clip, of Tom York from Radiohead, like in the audience at a Red Hot Chili Peppers live performance on TV. I think it was Jules Holland, at like a UK show. Red Hot Chili Peppers are the musical guest. They're really on point for whatever reason. And Tom York is in the audience just freaking out, like he loves them. And then Tom York went on to work with Flea and make this band called Atoms for Peace. And I saw a lot of the commentary around that, which was really funny. It was sort of like, well, it's weird to see Radiohead, Radiohead be into Red Hot Chili Pepper, because the cultural stereotype would be that like a Radiohead fan, a super serious laptop Radiohead fan that's really into thinking about capitalism and computers is just gonna hate the Red Hot Chili Peppers. They just have nothing in common whatsoever. So to see like Tom York be like totally invested in Red Hot Chili Peppers music and like love what they're doing is really interesting to me, because I think there is actually a lot of crossover between those two audiences. Like I can say honestly, I love the like cold, technological computery Radiohead music.
Bleep, bleep,
the bleeps and bloops that you hate so much. But I like the Red Hot Chili Peppers too. I think, in other words, there's like this sort of, this dumb like camp thing that happens in musical fandom. That's like, I am in the Red Hot Chili Peppers and Dave Matthews Band camp, and that means I can never cross over into the Radiohead camp. But that's bullshit, because I feel like popular music is it crosses over for everyone.
It's funny you mentioned that because I read a review of Californication on a punk website, and the guy was like, Dave Matthews Band is better than this garbage. But I actually want to read to you something from Pitchfork. This is the Pitchfork review.
Yeah, they're a great example of this kind of
1999, and I think it actually hits something that underscores what we're saying here. And this is from the review. E-H, that's actually in the review. But let's face it, the biggest obstacle in your enjoyment of a Red Hot Chili Peppers album is horny crooner Anthony Kiedis. If you can stomach lines like Gorilla, Cuntilla, Sammy D and Salmonella, up to my ass and alligators, let's get it on with the alligator haters, and to finger paint is not a sin, I put my middle finger in, you're good to go. If those lines make you wince, like Pitchfork editor Ryan Schreiber, keep in mind that I pulled those from only 2 of 15 songs. And then he goes on to say, if you want quality, commercial, Jeep stereo, headphone, stadium-filling champion rock that you can get behind, where else are you going to turn not to Eminem, you ain't? And it's like,
what a weird,
so there's a lot going on there, and I don't think we really need to talk about it. But one thing I want to point out is, aside from illustrating the kind of example of the attitude we were just describing, there is something I think campy and kitschy, but like intentional in lyrics like the ones that he quoted, and that there is something a little explicitly melodramatic that they're doing that reminds me a little bit of Broadway. Like there's a showmanship, there's an excessiveness that I think is intentional, and I think it rubs people the wrong way because and I mean this like the band, it's a little Kiss-y.
Yeah.
And I don't think the Chili Peppers shy away from that. And I think it's a little queer because when you talk about campiness and cosplay and bare chests and socks over your ding dong, I think you're already in a realm of masculine excess.
Yeah.
That's already queer. And so, the guys themselves, they're not that queer. They're queer adjacent, and they're kind of queer allies, and they have their own, wrapped up, dark, complicated sexual histories that we don't need to get into in terms of their biography.
Sure.
But in terms of the performance, and that's what I'm stressing here, the kind of stage performance, the theatrics, but also the sort of intentionality between of these like kind of thematic albums. In a way that's kind of similar to the Smashing Pumpkins. And so on that note, this is the only other review I wanted to read to you, an excerpt from. This is from the same year, Rolling Stone, and it picks up on a couple different things from a different perspective than the Pitchfork review. And it says, for Lord knows what reasons, age, sobriety, blonde on blonde ambitions, or worship at the altar of Billy Corgan, they've settled down, they being the Chili Peppers, they've settled down and written a whole album's worth of tunes that tickle the ear, romance the booty, swell the heart, moisten the tear ducts, and dilate the third eye.
Damn.
While all previous Chili Peppers projects have been highly spirited, Californication dares to be spiritual and epiphanal. I can't even pronounce that word. But like, it's related to epiphanies, proposing that these evolved motherfuckers basically are now moving toward funk's real holy grail, that salty marriage of esoteric mythology and insatiable musicality that salvages souls, binds communities, and heals the sick.
Good Lord.
And then it ends by saying...
Music writers are the worst. Jesus.
I know, but it ends by saying... I know, this is pretty bad, but it ends by saying, not exactly your average white band.
Wow.
And I was like,
interesting.
Record scratch there for any number of reasons. And so I think that kind of gives us both sides of like the hater and the fan sort of thinking through the music, but I actually think it leads towards maybe what you're interested in. about Californication and like how we get to that place from a band like this.
Yeah, let's get to that. I mean, I love what you just said because it makes me think about other, white male artists that we think of as queer in some way, that there's some sort of like cringe or like goofiness or just kind of lameness to their lyrics, and that's like almost a hallmark or a trademark of their sound and maybe of their queerness too. I mean, all that like alligator hater stuff, is like, yeah, they're not afraid to be ridiculous. But it reminds me of actually both David Bowie and Lou Reed, both of whom have albums that many people would describe as just really cringy, bad, dorky. They weren't afraid to be that way, and
Neil Young and Dylan too.
That's right. And so it does make me think of California as a site for that sort of cultural production. And like I said, Californication as a song really taps into a lot of the themes I was trying to get to in this class, which is that California is this site of the American dream. But what happens to the American dream when we think of it as a California dream? The song that Californication is not, it doesn't quite fit into the ballad of Under the Bridge, but it is like the songwriting thing, right? Like, it's, Kiedis wrote these lyrics and felt that it was the best thing he'd ever written, that it contained like, for him, all the contradictions of the dream of California. And that's what it seems like the turn is also. The turn to like what you're calling ballads or whatever, reaching a wider audience, increasing the sort of complexity of their songcraft is in part sort of revealing more layers about that project of California. Like when they're just like the funky Red Hot Chili Peppers of the 80s, they're just sort of in the party, 100% in the party, sex, drugs, rock and roll. But by the time you get to 1999, Kiedis and the Red Hot Chili Peppers are asking us to reflect on a different version of California than just sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I mean, Californication is a dark, dark song. And I wanted to get into exactly what it has to say. And we can do a little bit of, I know, Justin, you're an English professor, so this should be well-worn territory for you. I mean, how many times do you do this in class where you like read a poem together and like close read it? Do you do those sorts of things?
In my yeah, I do. But I mean, once or twice a year. Yeah, the students hate poetry for the most part, so I have to be careful about what I choose and how long we spend on it.
Isn't it funny that you would say students hate poetry? Because I get the same thing, but then you ask them to like name their favorite songs or their favorite like rap lyrics, and they're ready to like just like have shit memorized. So it's almost like you don't hate poetry. You just like need it set to music, basically.
Definitely, yeah. I agree. And I think it's worth unpacking a little bit here, and kind of maybe sharing some of the lines, and then kind of thinking about especially the contradictions that are coming through some of the lines, and then trying to sort of dilate and speculate on what he could be referring to. But maybe it would actually be better to be saying here what the poem could be referring to, but also what we can do with it.
Yeah.
As you know from our many text conversations, and from our mutual reading of Death of the Author by Bart in 1967 there in graduate school, part of my own concern is less with authorial intention and more with the ways that we can make texts productive of things that we're interested in.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're doing here.
Yeah, kind of looking at this as and that's part of why I was interested in doing this reading, is exactly that, is sort of like eliminating the authorial intent is very easy with this song, because it's one of those songs that Kiedis was like, I don't even know where this came from. This sort of like these phrases just popped into my mind. Like you can take the like kind of mystical view of songwriting, that this is just, Kiedis and the Chili Peppers are merely a vessel for sort of grabbing stuff that was in the air and giving it to us. And I think 1999 is a really interesting moment to see the dream of California be presented as the dream and the nightmare at the same time. And you put it very well in one of your texts to me about this song, that the song sort of describes the pleasure of something that it's diagnosing as fundamentally broken. And so it's like saying, like, dream of California, dream of California, dream of California, but beware, because the dream isn't real and it's actually a nightmare. So we can get into it a little bit. The first lyrics are really, and these are lyrics that he said he heard someone say out loud, the phrase "psychic spies from China." But I think it's interesting that right from the beginning, there's like kind of a global sort of touch to this. That there's an idea,
That's true.
just like in Mamas and the Papas. That song, California Dreamin', is entirely from the perspective of a character that's not in California. All the leaves are brown and the sky is gray. I'd be safe and warm if I was in LA.
Right.
And the character never gets to LA and never gets to California. They're going to be staying there where it's cold. There's something about the dream that California seems to represent globally, even. Of drawing people to fantasize about something. So what is that fantasy? The first lines of the song are: psychic spies from China try to steal your mind's elation, and little girls from Sweden dream of silver screen quotation. And if you want these kind of dreams, it's Californication. I mean, there's a lot going on just from those opening lines.
Yeah, for me, it sits us back in the whole '90s post Berlin Wall moment of like America as the unipolar kind of global center, and it's definitely very pre 9/11. This sentiment, and it's California as the center and not New York, which is interesting both from a historical perspective but also from a post 9/11 perspective. Because I think New York absorbed a lot of cultural gravity from California after 9/11. That's just one of the consequences. People wanted to move to cities, and I think it's only in the last 10 years that LA has become the kind of city that is attractive to the kids. When I was thinking about where to go after college, New York for certain had a pull and a gravity that was post Californication, actually, in addition to being post 9/11.
That's right. All of that indie rock stuff that we want to eventually get into, because I think we're conceiving this as part of you and I going down the rabbit hole of our own sort of music histories.
Yeah.
As you told me that you're going to be seeing the Strokes on New Year's Eve, and I'm sick over that because I realized they're like a 20-year band now too, which is fucking nuts to me.
I think their first album was 2001.
Yeah. Yeah, and that era of 2001 Strokes. That's when I was thinking about moving to New York as well. LA meant shit to me, even though I was sort of in the radius of Los Angeles where I was directly living. It was like, it's weird because it's kind of like 9/11 drew people to New York. We've mentioned this before.
100%.
What the fuck is that about? Because I was part of it. Like I moved in 2003, and the people here in California told me I was nuts for moving to New York. They said that's where you're going to get blown up on the subway or something. And it was like literally that like hysterical fear of terrorism was what was expressed to me. But I wanted to go to New York because of it's so ironic and lame to say. Like I heard about a music scene in Williamsburg and like the Yeah Yeah Yeahs and like all these sort of like hot hipster bands. I thought that's where the cool people are, and LA is kind of a dead place. It was like Californication in that sense. That song in '99 is kind of like the death knell of a certain vision of Los Angeles.
And in some ways, it's telling us that, pre 9/11, that especially in the second half of the 20th century, if not, for most of the 20th century, California in some ways was more the golden magnet. And so many kind of biographies of people that like made it in the film industry, but also the music industry were about, they were 17 and they got in a van and went to California. Like Los Angeles was the blah, blah, blah.
It's manifest destiny. I mean, that we have to say that phrase because it seems like, I mean, even in the lyrics, it's the edge of the world and all of Western civilization. The sun may rise in the east, at least it's settled in a final location. It's understood that Hollywood sells Californication. The idea that, to me, what invoking manifest destiny there and the edge of the world and the actual natural element of it, the sun sets in the west, and so like there's a sort of like almost like a spiritual or godlike approval of the movement to the west. At the same time, the line is saying Hollywood sells you this, like this is a product that's being sold you. I feel like that this song carefully crafts those contradictions in every in every verse because that's what the song is about.
Yeah, and the Hollywood sells Californication, it's the third line of verse 2, and it clearly parallels the third line of verse 1. If you want these kind of dreams, it's Californication. So you have the repetition of Californication, which he's saying is this concept, but it's also, I think, and I remember this at the time, because even though everyone hated the Chili Peppers, I quietly listened to them a lot.
Sure, yeah, me too.
I just didn't advertise it. But I thought this song was interesting because it was about commodification. And in my late teens, early 20s, even not having been all that well read in everything that we would talk about now, I knew from conversations with my dad that commodification was this thing. And we knew from the kind of grunge indie politics of that same era, and especially the term that me and you have said was a big term of that era and no longer is talked about at all, which is selling out.
Yeah.
Because of those conversations, I was primed to hear this song in a particular kind of way, and in a particular kind of way that I still understand, although with additional layers. And so it is interesting that you can find in a song like this a sort of meta reflection on the commodification of culture. And it's also interesting from the 99 perspective, in a way that I think you were implying earlier, that this ends up being a reflection on a kind of millennial dream, which is layered on top of a millennial fantasy, which is layered on top of a colonial fantasy, which is layered on top of a religious fantasy. And so that there's these historical layers of the onion, so to speak, that the song is peeling, and that we're peeling and unpeeling, in which we're trying to get at what are the implications of commodity culture, and what are the implications of putting commodity culture at the center of our understanding of the culture of capitalism? Because really, capitalism is what's being talked about here. It's rare to get a pop song explicitly meditating on not only a Marxist term like commodification, and behind that is the term alienation. It's interesting to get a pop song meditating so explicitly on it, but it's also interesting to get a pop song saying, I'm going to talk to you about capitalism not from the perspective of big bad necessarily corporate culture, but from a tension in these two verses. And this is where I want to end and throw it back to you. And the tension is this: he just told us that people everywhere are dreaming of Californication. The fantasy is participatory. The fantasy is seductive. The fantasy is desirable. And that fantasy is also, it's part of a supply and demand. It's part of a supply and demand of dreams. And it's part of a dream factory that's being engineered by, various, corporate content engineers that the Chili Peppers are actually signed with, and that Nirvana was signed with as well, let the record show, as well as other bands. And so we're introduced to a tension between not just a big bad world that's being fed to us through some kind of false consciousness. We're being introduced to an idea of a commodity culture in which we are desiring a form of culture that's also inextricably linked to a kind of alienation. And so what does it mean to be wrapped up in a sort of codependent relationship with a culture that's constantly promising something to you that you want, but it's also leaving you with an emptiness and a loss because it's not actually necessarily leading you to a kind of sustainable life or life form or life world, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think you captured what we really wanted to get out about this song is how dialectical it is. It's not a song that's like a political song in the sense of like, don't sell out to the corporations. The corporations are going to destroy everything. It's not like that sort of straightforward Rage Against the Machine type expression of anger at a particular power structure. Instead, what this song seems to be about, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to be about the sort of like push and pull between the company that's like washing out the authenticity, at the same time it's delivering the desire. That those things are wrapped up, and it feels like the lyric after lyric seems to capture that idea of these things being wrapped up. I mean, these some of the most I think affecting lyrics in the whole production are when he's singing about space. He says, space may be the final frontier, but it's made in a Hollywood basement. And Cobain, can you hear the spheres singing songs off station to station? And Alderon's not far away. It's Californication. So just for to do the genius lyrics on those, there's so many references there. Space may be the final frontier is Star Trek, right? Cobain is obviously Nirvana, but he's saying, can you hear the spheres singing songs off station to station? The spheres is sort of like this new age idea that the planets sing to each other and that there's like a song to the universe, and that in this poetic rendering, these spheres would be singing songs off station to station, which is a very famous album from David Bowie about his awful experience coming to Los Angeles, making a movie, I think The Man Who Fell to Earth, and being like just a rotten cocaine addict and falling into like the despair of addiction while he's in Hollywood. So that like push and pull of the Hollywood dream, like drawing people to something that, space may be the final frontier, but it's all fake. Like it's not real. To me, there's something really, it is poetic, but it's capturing exactly what you were just saying, which is that sort of like you want it, and yet the knowledge of it being fake is there at the same time. And yet the desire is real. The knowledge of it being fake is real. The fakeness is real. And it really gets us to me, like, think about California as a stand-in for neoliberalism or capitalism. This notion that there are baubles that are being offered to you, and you don't care that they're fake. You want them anyway. And it seems like even though California is a place that the common narrative is of disappointment, people come here and they say, it's not what I expected it to be. I mean, that's like the number one thing that people say when they come to California is it's not what I expected. I thought it was something else. And there's something really compelling about that, because it is globalization. It is this notion of like Hollywood as a machine of propaganda to sell a certain image to the whole world, but it's an image, and everyone seems to know that, and yet it's still kind of the engine, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that we forget that Cobain was in Los Angeles for the LA riots in '92.
That's right.
And so I think part of the interesting part about Cobain there is he spent enough time in Los Angeles with Courtney, and there's that famous photo session, I think, of them at the MTV Video Music Awards. I think that was LA in that year. And the reason I bring that up from the song lyric is because we have that association of him being from Aberdeen and sort of around Olympia and sort of around Seattle. But he was also a guy that went through LA, and I think there's like
signed with the major labels.
There's a short book to be written called Cobain in LA,
yeah.
I think, or a chapter in a book. And I think that it also shows something through that reference that's true about his narrative, in which he wrote about this exact phenomenon a lot, just from a different perspective. And it kind of, he's a quintessential example of also someone who carried, I think we said this on our Cobain EP a few years ago, but he carried a working class depression, if you will. He carried it with him to LA, and I think that's one of the things that is actually behind people's disappointment, is that the fantasy that's activated is in you, but you're also a composition of the places that you were. And so coming to LA, or I'd say for us in New York, which is, I think, an apt parallel in the ways that we just described, it's never the place that you thought it was. And you're always going to be disappointed on a certain level. I would pressure a little bit this idea of the fake. And I would say, I think, I'm not sure if he actually talks about fakeness, but he does get up into, I think, problems of authenticity that speak to the sort of disappointments, among other things that you just described. In a couple of the bridges, we have the body modification stuff. And I think that he does well for sort of thinking not through what is your real body, but thinking through a kind of critique of body augmentation. I'm not so sure, and this is an intentional pun, I'm not so sure this has aged well, which is to say, I'm not so sure this is totally true, but he writes, pay your surgeon very well to break the spell of aging. Celebrity skin, is this your chin, or is that war you're waging? Which I'm assuming is on aging and on death. And he goes on to say later in the song, pay your surgeon very well to break the spell of aging. Sicker than the rest, there is no test, but this is what you're craving. I take a very different view of plastic surgery than I think I did when I was 20. And I wonder what Anthony Kiedis himself or the Chili Peppers themselves now as their 50s and 60s or however old they are, how they quite feel about some of those augmentation processes. But I do think that you can think about, two different things at once. I do appreciate, though, the fact that the body is put at the center of this. I think that's important to the story that's being told here of Californication. And it's part of the romance that's being delivered through the song. I also think, and this might be something else to touch on before we get further into our speculations, that there's another element of Californication that he's adding to the concept, and that's one around technology. You mentioned space. You mentioned the Sphere singing songs off Station to Station, which I also think just calls to mind a certain distributive network of sort of corporate means of production around music and culture. But I think that there's
it's not just globalization; it's like universalization. Like it seems like Californication seems like a word that mixes well with those concepts, with the concept of like exporting. And exporting the culture in that line into the stars and into the planets, even. Yeah.
And I think that in verse 3, the song says, "A teenage bride with a baby inside, getting high on information, and buy me a star on the boulevard. It's Californication." I think a teenage bride with a baby inside, getting high on information. You could twist that line around and it's a direct line from that to TikTok, into Instagram, into Reels, into Snapchat. It's a direct line to the technology of the commodification of the self that we associate with the age of social media, and in particular, even youth culture.
It's Silicon Valley. I mean, that's Californication too. Is like,
right.
To me, like, what that makes me think is that part of this song is about being a star. Buy me a star on the boulevard. Hollywood. And Hollywood being this machine that drew people to physically move to California with the hopes of being discovered and becoming a star. Literally then being like placed, we use the word star, right? Being placed in the universe somewhere as like this special, bright, shining, celestial body. That's the fantasy. Even Mamas and Papa's song is about physically going to LA. But what changes is Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley allows us to, because you had to go to LA to get discovered by producers, discovered by capital, was you had to go to Hollywood. But what Silicon Valley does, and really the locus of cultural power shifts from Hollywood or is exported to Silicon Valley and vice versa. I mean, the area of Sunset Boulevard.
Fully agreed.
The area of Sunset Boulevard that I was working on at Emerson College when I was working there, it was all filled with major tech companies who were starting their movie studios. So next door to us was Netflix, Google, Amazon Studios, Hulu Studios, and what they call that area now is Silicon Beach. So the idea is that Silicon Valley, to me, becomes they create technology that makes it so that you don't have to actually physically go to LA to be a star. You can then have the cameras and the technology in your pocket to pull out and like become an influencer. So the dream of Californication becomes something that's less about physically getting to LA, and instead LA is the whole world. Like LA is everywhere.
Well, and I think that that's part of what makes this song so ripe and magnetic for us to return to in 2021.
Right.
Because really what you're arguing there is Californication was exported everywhere and is now sort of the defining or a defining concept for how we should understand not only the commodification of culture in the 21st century, in terms of a Californication that's no longer bound by geography, but which is enabled everywhere by a kind of mobile technology, but also the implications of that. Because what the song is saying is this is dystopian. That's what the song is saying.
Yeah, it's a dark song.
And it's part of a dystopian streak in, for lack of a better word, alt or independent music of the last 50 years. As probably starting with Sgt. Pepper, to be quite honest with you, if not before. And this dystopian streak is interesting because in a way that recent headlines would confirm, whether we're thinking of Facebook or some other company, and we can name a billion of them. It's something that we've said on the show before, that the sort of big tech utopian dreams, which are part and parcel of the corporate cultures behind Tesla, Facebook, etc. These utopian companies with their utopian visions, they have inherited the California dream that you've been describing here. The song is, in some ways, the pivot point between a geography of California and a sort of mobilized Californication that's available to all. And this is where I'm getting to. This utopian and dystopian tension and dimension that the song's describing. What it's also saying is maybe this is what we're implying as well. We are now not just Hollywood. We are now the agents of self-commodification and cultural commodification, that we, in the sense that we are directing the short movies that we are presenting to the world through YouTube and TikTok, but also to the sense that we are the ones composing the tweets that we are hoping for with the likes, which the likes are the stars on the Hollywood Boulevard of the 21st century, in the sense that we are all trying to become celebrity agents of our little worlds. Even the self-described socialists, which I would say maps very interestingly on the tension of the 90s between selling out or not, and behind independent and indie rock, and the ethos and political tensions between the market and capital that were prevalent then. It's an easy map from that of the 90s onto the last 10 years of like sort of socialist entrepreneurialism, if you will.
Yeah.
And so this entrepreneurial socialism, which is an outgrowth of all this, this is all wrapped up in this idea that and this is what I think is so great about the song's attention to body modification, is that when you're body modifying, you are self-directing your own commodification. That's where we are now. We're all self-directing our own commodification. We're not necessarily easy targets of a corporation that's exploiting us. We are corporate agents ourselves. And that I think this is something that I would really like to spend some time on as we end towards our speculative portion of this conversation, because it's something I've spent a lot of time thinking about in preparation for today. That these ballads of the crisis, but also this song in particular, is an essential way for us to underscore what we've been always talking about in terms of capitalist culture from below. And this is, like, I think a good song for kind of introducing that. But it has larger implications.
This is
for us.
what you're craving. Yeah. That's what I think I wanted to point out about the song more than anything, is like, yeah, it's sort of indicating how we're implicated in this. It isn't a top-down phenomenon. There's a push and pull of forces happening here.
Yes. And so I think the cliche is to imagine corporate capitalism as the boogie man, if you will, and to say that capitalism and its capitalist culture's biggest problem is the gray flannel suit exploiting workers and consumers and sort of running home with all the money. But part of what 21st century culture is telling us through our discussion of this song like this is we are making that culture ourselves, which means we're also we're exploiting ourselves in a way, and that the act of us becoming the entrepreneurs that we want to be in order to sell our visions of culture and capitalism, even in the form of critique, that this act is also on some level inherently and radically self-alienating, which means that we are making ourselves depressed through our very attempts to succeed at becoming the agents of our lives. And so I think that what I focus in on here is that, in contrast to the gray flannel suit boogeyman idea, I think we should also think a little bit more creatively about this idea of corporate personhood. Because since the 2010 decision around money and speech, which kind of reactivated this like corporate personhood discourse, the problem that has been going on at least since the 1970s, but it's always talked about in terms of corporations are not people. And there's like a lot of memes that they're not popular now, but they've been popular at different times. That's like, if a corporate person was really a person, when they committed murder, they'd be in prison. And it's kind of like, okay, like it's a
that
nice
movie, The Corporation. You remember that movie?
Yeah.
It was like, okay, if we're going to take seriously that a corporation is a person, then what type of person is it? And a corporation is a psychopath. And that was that movie. And I thought I was really sort of charmed by that thesis, honestly, when I was younger, because I thought, okay,
it's very charming.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Well,
but then now I'm wondering, okay, well, how do we, as these figures outside of the corporation? I don't think we are outside of it, really.
Exactly.
But
so here's what I would ask.
We're psychopaths too, then, I guess.
Well, at a minimum, I'd ask: are we not incorporated? That's what I would ask as a legal, technical, but also philosophical question, and I would answer it by saying, what if by corporate personhood, we don't mean corporations that are legally people according to the 14th Amendment necessarily? What if by corporate personhood, we were actually describing the self-production of commodity culture in which we're putting ourselves at the center in a new media ecosystem that is bound up with these legacy media corporations, but also irrevocably distinct from them in the sense that corporations are not fake people any more than we are not fake corporations, by which I mean we are the new corporations. So that the use of social media, the commodification of our thought, the attempt to sell our thinking and our feelings and our ideas that are these extensions of us, this attempt to self-commodify, this Californication of our being, that this act means that whether we are legally incorporated as persons or not is almost irrelevant in a certain way, because we are acting and behaving as corporations. And so to me, this is interesting in part because of the 90s moment we've been describing and talking about for many years, because the tensions between selling out are inherent in this problem that we're announcing that comes out of this song. And it was completely wrapped up, if you will, in the drama or melodrama that was enacted when a band moved from an indie label to a major label.
Yeah.
Because that selling out was supposed to be you're losing artistic freedom. But the question is, in today's context, every tweet that's meant to go viral, or every TikTok video that's meant to somehow gain you followers and likes, ultimately for you to live off of, even if you think of YouTube in terms of advertisements that you can make, your ability to commodify yourself through media, is that not also not about your constriction with a corporate manager who's telling you what you can and cannot say, and down that road goes cancel culture, and down that road goes disinformation? What I'm more interested in is not the check on your independence and freedom, and ultimately your thinking and feeling and production, is not the check market demand and audience expectations. Is that not actually the thing that you're in a codependent relationship with? Not the corporate flannel boss dude who's looking over your shoulder, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, isn't that what people like Joe Rogan and even Donald Trump are banking on, that they're quote unquote going directly to the people? And obviously they're using technology, they're using these media channels. I mean, Rogan is now paid by Spotify $100 million, etc. But there's this idea of authenticity that is like, that is somehow in the 90s, that it was connected to the idea that authenticity is lost when you sign that contract with that major label. I mean, we watched Reality Bites with Bill and KJ a few months ago,
Yeah.
and it's crazy. We were tripping out because the plot of that movie is that Winona Ryder is an independent documentarian. She makes like films about her friends, and she makes like these indie films. And her conundrum in the movie is that a major corporation wants to pay her a ton of money to produce her film. And you're kind of like, how the fuck do young people watch this movie now? And what do they get from it? Because it doesn't seem to make sense. To me, it's like that would be a dream of a young person, would be that a corporation would find your indie film on YouTube and give you a couple $1 million to produce a prestige version of it, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
It seems like the game has changed, and that idea of authenticity is interesting to me. I think, with the body modification, with the like playing to an audience, you're always creating an inauthenticity, right? You're always sort of like crafting something that isn't really you. And so the alienation, to me, like I see this especially in like really young people, like my nieces and nephews that are already like I have a niece that's like 8 years old that says, guess how many followers on TikTok I have? And I'm like, I don't know, 400? She's like, no, 750. And I was like, God damn, like 750 followers. She's 8 years old, and she thinks a lot about. Does she
have her own phone?
Oh yeah, she does reviews. I mean,
she has her own phone at 8.
Yeah. Oh yeah. This family has been very tech heavy. She does reviews of like shampoos and like soaps and like literally makes like little commercials and stuff. And to me, like I don't know, you tell me, Justin. Like, because like I'm the 90s guy looking at this and I'm like, holy shit, like her mind is owned by corporations and owned by like this desire to like perform for an invisible audience that she wants to please, to get these stars on the boulevard, to get these like followers and likes and RTs and all that shit. It's super disturbing because like I just put up the word in the chat, Dream Factory, that Hollywood for a long time was regarded as, and still is regarded as, the dream factory, right? And to me, those two words together kind of indicate the dialectic a little bit, right? Like there's the dream, and there's this like notion of like some like humanity and desire and subconscious ideas coursing through it, but also the idea that it's a factory and that these things are being produced in an industrial setting. And those two things going together, there's something really disturbing about it to me.
I think part of what's shifted is, and this goes back to what you said at the beginning of the show, we've seen a shift in the production of stars from an early 20th century model in which the stars were kind of owned by corporations and people went to centrally designed warehouses where they were shown screens of people they wanted. Yeah. They wanted to be, and they wanted to do things with of all kinds, and they wanted to be with in all kinds of ways. Yeah. And now the main corporations have added to that ecosystem so that ecosystem still exists, or those screens still exist, but there's a more complex landscape in which corporations are now brokering screens where we can connect with new stars who are not being sold to us. They are selling themselves to us. And we want that. We want to be around them. We want to hear what they're talking about.
It seems like it's that notion, that exact notion you're saying is many people would see that as democracy. That there used to be an elite that produced stars, and it had to go through the companies and go through Hollywood, and now, everyone can just pull out their phone and be a star themselves and sell directly to the people, right?
I would see it more in the casino sense, and this came out in all these Facebook papers of the last few weeks. The house always wins. So in other words, to me, it's not democracy if the profits are being accumulated and centralized in the hands of a few, like people like Mark Zuckerberg or Jeff Bezos. They are, by brokering our direct relationship to the spaces and people that the people that we desire, by brokering that, they've actually discovered a more efficient way to give us the dreams we want. and they're making as much money from that as the old studios ever made or are making now.
Yeah, you become the product in the same way that an old Hollywood star became a product. And yeah, you get your star on the boulevard, you get your likes, you get your clicks, and maybe you get some dollars. But you don't get the dollars that the corporations that run these media platforms are making.
Yes, and I think that there's a historical complication here, and this is what I realize we're getting to time. It's been a really invigorating conversation.
Yeah, it's been fun. I told you Californication is a hell of a song, man. There's a lot to talk about with it.
There is an article in The Atlantic from a couple years ago. I don't know exactly when. 2015, written by Deborah Cohen. It's part of a kind of a looking back on indie culture, a wave of articles you can find online from that era. And, part of what I'm always interested in when we talk about authenticity is the fact that, number one, I don't believe in it. I believe in the performance of authenticity. And I think that part of what we're doing with new media, so-called, is that we've taken screens and stages of performance that we used to associate with performers, and we've moved them out of the realm of specialized studios and spaces and brought them into domesticated spaces and public spaces. So that when you are self-producing your content, I'm sure this is the case with the 8-year-old you just described, she's probably doing it in her house. And I think spatially, it's just interesting to note that that move we're talking about here is a move from where the camera moves from the studio to the domestic living room,
as we both sit in our own houses producing content for the internet.
Yeah, and so part of what I'm saying is I've never believed in authenticity, and that's why I thought there was a little bit of a shamey vibe in the song's attitude about body modification.
I hear you.
That I was like, that's a little old school and sort of old dad, and I don't believe in that. But part of the more interesting thing that comes out of this Atlantic article and a number of other articles that are sort of doing that longer history on indie and what it was. And I'm not the most educated person on indie. In fact, we know for a fact that there is listeners of this show who are much more credible speakers on this subject. But here's what I find interesting. In this article on indie rock, on the indie movement of the 80s and 90s, there is a passage that says, indie's founding premise that anyone could be a producer of art and culture, the more inventively off-center, the better, is now a staple of the new media of the information age. Now, this is 2015. This is pre-TikTok. Now, that idea cuts through. This idea of like self-making, it cuts through everything that I've read on indie rock in terms of like, what was it? And also because there was that, like, I'm making this and I'm producing these things and I'm working with a small group to make it who aren't telling me what to do. That ethos, that vibe, that mentality, and that definition was so important to that conversation about selling out, because wasn't the major label going to corrupt your authenticity, which is to say, redesign and retool your performance for an ever bigger market. And now, of course, we've lost that, and or it's changed, I should say. Yeah, but here's the point that I want to make, and this is actually one of my final points, because this is something that I came to as a result of my research and preparation and participation in this conversation today. What this tells us is that this tension that we now experience and read about and participate in terms of Twitter and TikTok and YouTube and Instagram and Facebook, this new media tension where we are now self-producing our own content, but also our own alienation. This very 21st century, very modern, very new, very urgent issue that we're talking about, that we're describing here, that we're participating in, its roots are actually not in the visual technologies. The roots are in the acoustic and auditory technologies of the 80s and 90s, meaning it's actually the move from the phonograph to the cassette. And it's the move from the cassette to the 4-track. And it's the move, in other words, the problems we're encountering now with the self-production of our own alienation, which is part of this dystopian mood that we're describing, it appeared first in the media of the music industry and then moved into what we would now call multimedia or visual culture that we associate with the cell phone and mobile technology. So that's another way to say that Silicon Valley did not invent the problems that we associate with Facebook. Silicon Valley and all of us who participate in it have inherited a set of problems that was being worked out by indie musicians in the 80s and 90s. And I think that that's a new reason to go back and listen to the music, listen to this song, but also for me and you to continue to reflect on why the conversations that occurred in the bedrooms, in the living rooms, and the concert halls of Seattle and of New York and of LA in the 80s and 90s don't just matter to the histories of music. They actually matter to the histories of not only media, but histories of capitalism, and more importantly, histories of corporate personhood. Because the thing that Californication is wrestling with is something that contributed to the suicide of Cobain, but it's also something that we're seeing in each other now in our everyday relations. And I think that ability of that Janus-faced element of Californication to toggle us back and forth in time, to get at the nature of our own self-production of alienation that we call our freedom, is, I think, something that we're going to continue to wrestle with for years to come.
I couldn't say it better, Justin. That's sort of where we wanted to go when thinking about this song. And this, I said before we got started with thinking about Californication as a song. You know, we were saying, I was saying to you, I didn't want this to just be like a celebration of the song and like an appreciation of the Red Hot Chili Peppers, but more like something that I noticed when I'm teaching this class and pulling these songs together was realizing that there is a discourse in these songs. You know, there is an evolution of a discourse. And California becomes a sort of stand-in or a way of thinking about capitalism. At the same time, it is the practical operation of capitalism and the front edge of it, the face of it, if you will. The ending of Mad Men, spoiling the end of Mad Men for everyone. I don't think I'm really spoiling it. But of Don Draper going to California and finding his mojo again and realizing that like he can find a way through his personal crisis and his professional crisis of not being able to like figure out how to advertise to this new generation of counterculture kids. He's meditating there and he's got a smile on his face as he recognizes that he's going to sell Coca-Cola with this sort of, I'd like to buy the world of Coke. He's going to sell the new age back to them. And that's, I thought, was a really brilliant ending of Mad Men, and very, very dark and very Californication, because it gets to that idea you're getting at, which is going to be how our own ideas of authenticity and alienation are themselves the engine of the media. And you know, there are so many lines in the song. We didn't get to all of them, but I just wanted to mention this bridge as we end here. That born and raised by those who praise control of population. Everybody's been there, and I don't mean on vacation. So in other words, the song is recognizing, even in 1999, this idea that the geographical element of and the sort of boundaries of geography that California represents are not necessarily as active in the 21st century, when technology has produced the ability to engage in Californication no matter where you are around the world. It's an incredibly disturbing song, and one that I think is just like the best pop songs and best rock songs, whatever, are the ones that seem like they're beamed in from somewhere else. That I don't even think the Red Hot Chili Peppers wrote this song. This is something that is sort of a manifesto from another place, and it ends up being something that's well worth thinking about. So for those of you who haven't heard Californication, go press play on that and listen to that song and tell us if we're right. Tell us if we're right or wrong about what we're thinking about it, because it seems like a song that resonates very powerfully. So thank you, Justin. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Happy 300th episode.
Happy 300 and many more. I know you and I are thinking about some more song episodes. I certainly have some in mind, and we're going to crank through maybe the late 90s and early 2000s as we figure out why the fuck did all this stuff resonate with us when we were young? Because it is, I was thinking about selling out and authenticity and all those sort of things, but in really broad terms. And as I look back on this stuff now, I'm kind of like, wow, there's a kind of complex reality that's being communicated by these songs. All right, man, this was fun.
Definitely. Thank you very much.
Well, all right. I think that's going to do it for today. I want to thank my guest, Justin Rogers Cooper, for being a good sport and talking about a Red Hot Chili Pepper song with me. I thought that was really fun. I enjoyed myself, and I learned a lot, and I hope you did too. We've got lots more Nostalgia Trap stuff on the way. I'm probably most excited about our movie club. Go to patreon.com/nostalgiatrap if you want to join up and be part of our live Zoom discussion starting November 19th. We'll be talking about The Night of the Hunter and film noir. Very, very excited to do that. So come be a part of that and the whole Nostalgia Trap community. Patreon.com/nostalgiatrap. Thanks for 300 episodes. Here's to 300 more. Take care, and we will see you soon. Bye-bye.